But I want to bring GOP strategist John Thomas and Democratic strategist Dave Jacobson. Thank you both so much for being with us. John, Dave, let me ask you, what do you want to hear from the president today?
I think the biggest thing is I don't want him to overpromise and underdeliver. I think that's something that we saw with Puerto Rico, and what we really need is a coherent strategy. We need to make sure that the president is giving realistic help in terms of what the federal government can do to local and state government, of course, number one. Number two, we also need to make sure that we've got a commander-in-chief that doesn't lie to the American people and lie to people who are in need. We had this controversy just weeks ago about the number of people who died, American citizens who died in Puerto Rico. The president clearly didn't have his facts straight. And so I think more than anything, what we need is somebody who's going to tell the truth to the American people and also be there to help those in need.
Yeah, so John, with that said, what are you expecting the president to do here differently than perhaps he did after Maria in Puerto Rico?
Well,
what does he have
Christy,
to do?
I think first he has to attempt to show compassion and show people that he cares and that the federal government cares. And I think also the other thing is President Trump, when he's surveying the damage, has to listen to his advisors and people on the ground to figure out what is the proper role that the federal government and FEMA can play in helping Florida and places that have been devastated. For instance, there have been federal military bases that have been demolished, places that house our weapons, our fighters jets. That is a clear area where the federal government can say, look, we can go to appropriations and allocate funds and help them rebuild. I think it's about coming up with that perfect partnership between the local and federal side. That's, I think, what President Trump can really help with.
And we know that he's going to go into Georgia as well today. And Georgia has just been devastated, Dave. And the repercussions from what's happened in Georgia, the crops, the farming, the 2 million chickens that were lost, that has some wide-ranging implications for consequences, just in terms of feeding people. What do you expect he will promise there?
It's unclear what he's going to promise. I think one of the biggest unknowns here is whether or not he's going to actually shepherd in the military to come in and help to ensure that we get supplies to people in need who are desperate on the ground. You know, things like water and food, just the basics that you need to survive, obviously. And that's something that we haven't heard from the administration, of whether or not they're going to send in the military to help get those supplies to folks. They're obviously joining forces with local and state government, and FEMA's obviously actively engaged. But we haven't seen anything in terms of a meaningful effort from the military, which I think, you know, obviously could help to speed up the process, because we've got resources on that end that haven't yet been allocated for hurricane recovery. So that's the biggest question, is whether or not he's going to make that move.
You know, some people have said, look, this hurricane happened last Wednesday. Why? The president has held 3 rallies. He's met with Kanye West at the White House. He's gone golfing at his club. Why take so long to get to this devastated area?
Well, I think the argument can be made that the president, while it's important for him to come and see what he can do additionally, the president also, quite frankly, can get in the way. And so you want to let the first responders start to sort things out, do the most essential things first, and then allow President Trump to come in there, because look, he's going to bring a level of a spectacle with him just for being the president of the United States. So I actually think letting things settle out for a few days and then coming in and saying, what else can we do, is the appropriate approach here. But Dave's right. I think it's really having President Trump show compassion and say, whatever you need from the federal side, we've got your back.
Which he has said the federal side is willing and ready to assist here. He said that from the beginning. And I wanted to ask you too, Dave, about there was a poll out, new poll this weekend, that Melania Trump actually has a more favorable rating amongst Americans than the president himself does. So with her by his side, how does that affect the optics here?
Well, look, that's not uncommon. A lot of first ladies have a higher favorable rating than the president themselves. We've seen that with a number of past presidents, including Barack Obama, George W. Bush, for example, among others. And so that's not uncommon. Look, I think optically it's good for the president to have the first lady to show a united front, of course. But I think more broadly, in terms of the national narrative that we're seeing just 3 weeks before the election, the president's numbers are tanking. If you look at the generic ballot, ABC Washington Post just put out a poll this weekend that shows Democrats have an 11-point advantage in terms of the generic ballot. 538 has an 81% likelihood that Democrats are going to take command and control of the House of Representatives. So the president is toxic. Obviously, attaching himself to a more popular figure like Melania Trump may help optically, but 3 weeks before the election, I'm not convinced it's going to do anything to, sort of be the symbolic game changer that the president needs. And so at this point, I think it's increasingly likely that the Democrats are going to be taking back the House if you look at those polls. And that's going to pose a significant challenge to the president. Sure.
And I'm going to ask you this, and John, I want you to answer the same thing. The polls were not our friend going into the last election,
You're 100% right, Christy.
Everybody thought it was going to go one way, and it did not. So when we talk about these polls and where midterms are going to, which way they're going to lean, do situations like this, where the president is out and about and talking and promising, John, how effective is that? When we head into, I mean, we're less than a month away from
You're totally right, Christy, and polls are a snapshot in time reflective of where we were last week, not exactly where we are going forward. And both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have a vested interest in moving those polling numbers. So just because the polls are where they are today, I mean, look what's happening on the Senate map. If you had asked a couple weeks ago, prior to Kavanaugh, it looked favorable for Republicans, but not definite for them to hold the Senate. Now they're likely to hold the Senate and pick up seats. So we just don't know. Moments like this, if President Trump has some kind of remarkably positive moment, it could tighten that generic ballot even further. It's all about what happens in these last couple weeks before the midterms. Can the Republicans close fast? And look, when you control the White House, when you're President Trump and have the ability to drive the kind of media coverage and attention that he does, if he has a good moment, it's very possible things tighten. Conversely, Christy, if he has a bad moment, it's possible that it widens the gap. And that just, these are unknowns we cannot answer.
Absolutely.